Since the publication of Alchemised by Senlin Yu, two things have been made abundantly clear. The first, Alchemised is a terrible, awful trash book that nobody should ever read. And the second is that Alchemised fans are a bunch of idiots. But if you are an Alchemised fan, I'd like you to stick around if you can stomach it. Because this video could be an opportunity for you to discover some actually good books that actually do all of the things that Alchemised fans claim that Alchemised does well. All the things that Alchemised fans use as arguments for why it's actually a good book, I'm going to demonstrate in a stack of actually excellent novels. Some of which are romantasy, some of which are gothic, which Alchemised claims to be, and others are books that are unhinged in a way that is arguably similar to Alchemised, but does so in an interesting way, in a feminist way, which obviously Alchemised is a very anti-feminist book. These books are queer, they are angry, they are politically savvy, they are dramatic, they are powerful, they are tragic, they are gothic. They are all the things that Alchemised fans think that Alchemised is, and if you're a fan of that book, hopefully you can see this video as a door into a wonderful world of actually good, diverse, powerful, boundary-pushing literature that is actually worth your time. And if you're a fan of this channel who hates Alchemised as much as I do, don't worry, this will probably be the last time I talk about the book because I'm sick of it and I really want to get rid of my copy at this point. Let's jump in. So, you think that Alchemised is a feminist novel that was inspired by The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood rather than learning all the wrong lessons from it and turning The Handmaid's Tale into some monstrous kink. And you also think that in some strange way, Alchemised is a genius critique of war and war crimes. Well, you're wrong on all fronts, and instead, I recommend you read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang is my current favourite author, certainly my favourite author of fantasy fiction, and The Poppy War is the first book in a trilogy heavily inspired by early 20th century Chinese politics. This is a book about war, invasion, colonialism. It's a book about young soldiers being trained for war. The Poppy War is also a daringly feminist novel, not just in the sense that we have a strong female protagonist, because that's shallow thinking, but this is evidenced by the choices made by the character. About a quarter of the way into this novel, so very early on, our protagonist, Rin, actually makes it so that her womb is barren, so that her period never comes again, so that she can never carry children of her own. And she does so because her period is getting in the way of what she wants, which is to graduate from the country's most esteemed military academy, an academy that, by all odds, she never should have gotten into. The process of getting into this academy already took so much of her mind, her body, her soul, and she's going to get through it, no matter the cost, even if it means sacrificing what might be a better life, or at least opportunities for a different kind of life. In that way, this is a book about indoctrination, about militaristic propaganda, and that line of thinking takes us to the end of the novel, which I won't spoil, and into the second one. This is a wonderfully fierce work of fantasy, one of my favourite fantasy novels. It is dangerously dark in where it goes narratively, but more importantly, the decisions that are made by our protagonist. If you really think that Alchemised is dark, actually in its themes, in its politics, rather than just its loose, flimsy, and flat aesthetics, well, it's not. Alchemised is nothing but a masculine torture and abuse fantasy for women who have a patriarchy kink. And this is an actually daring work of feminist political fantasy that you should read instead. If you think that Alchemised is powerful because it's an exploration of forced pregnancy, you'd be wrong, because once again, this is a novel that is framed as a dark and daring romance. And instead, you should be reading something like this. You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. Andrew Joseph White is a trans man who, in this work of terrifying and raw adult horror fiction, explores not just the idea of being forced to carry a baby to term, but also doing so as a transgender man, as someone whose greatest fear and paranoia is, in the very first place, getting pregnant, being forced to carry a child that you don't want or that was conceived through ill means, let's say. I have to be careful with my words on YouTube. It's already a great and terrible tragedy and fear for so many people and in so many nations across the world. A woman's autonomy and right to do with her own body as she sees fit. These are things that have been controlled by men for centuries, by churches, by governments, etc. It's a topic that is brought up again and again by politicians for different reasons, as if a woman's body is always something that is up for debate, and her autonomy is always up for debate. And here, Andrew Joseph White takes it even further by bringing gender dysphoria into it. Our protagonist is a young trans man who got pregnant while in a cult and is being forced to keep the child because the cult wants it once the child is born. And this novel takes us through his pregnancy. We learn about his dysphoria, his autism, his choice to be voluntarily mute, his decision to be in a very abusive and traumatizing relationship with a psychopathic man, why he does these things to himself, and what the pregnancy does to his mind as well as his body. This is a wonderfully daring novel about bodily autonomy, about gender dysphoria, and about many other things besides, including cult mentalities. If you actually think that Alchemised has something clever to say about pregnancy and about the physical power dynamics of sex between men and women, you haven't seen anything yet, because Alchemised is trash. It is a waste of time. And if you're interested in those dynamics, those themes, read this instead. If you think that Alchemised is a sexy and daring work of romantic fantasy full of taboo physical subject matter, you really should throw it away. You should throw it away no matter what. And you should read this instead, What Fury Brings by Trisha Levenseller. This is a brilliantly daring romantic fantasy novel. It is a wonderful work of feminist writing. It is very positive towards the queer community, but it is still a straight romance. And it flips all of the toxic themes and tropes and story beats of romantic fantasy on their head, presenting us with a matriarchal nation, a princess who is hoping to get the throne, and a prince from a patriarchal nation whom she kidnaps and hopes to force into marriage in order to prove herself worthy of the throne. This novel takes the toxic man kidnaps woman to become his sex slave trope of romantic fantasy, but because it's written by a great feminist writer, it goes a lot further than that, because in those toxic romantasy novels, the woman is already within a system of patriarchal power. Thus, she is a second-class citizen by virtue of being a woman. And she is kidnapped by a man who has a lot of power. She is then put into a position of humility and servitude, where she experiences something akin to Stockholm Syndrome. There's nothing romantic about it, there's nothing sexy about it, but a lot of women with a patriarchy kink have been duped into thinking that it's hot. Here, we go further than just repeating it but flipping it, because instead, the man who is kidnapped is from a patriarchal nation. He's a prince with an abusive father. He's a man who has been raised in the heart of this system, who has not questioned why women are second-class citizens, why in his culture they don't have a word for the R word, the thing that men do to women. And so when he is kidnapped, he is shown what his culture is like by suddenly being one of those second-class citizens, by being shackled and forced into a marriage he does not want to be a part of. I won't tell you any more. You can go watch my full review if you want more information. But this is a wonderfully smart and subversive work of romantic fantasy. And it's also a romantic fantasy novel that has faced a lot of backlash from supposed fans of the genre who are discomforted by the idea of a man in a position that they fantasize themselves being in. Oh, it's not very nice, the idea of a man being kidnapped. The poor guy, I feel sorry for him. Do you not see the hypocrisy here? No, of course you don't. This is a very clever book, and it's also 50% spice. And the spice in here is kinky, it is celebratory. It also has a real focus on consent, something that the men that these women love so much in their romantasy books could learn something about. Consent is key, and this book reminds us of that. It's amazing. Throw away Alchemised and read this instead. So you think that Alchemised is some doomed romance or otherwise gothic tragedy, and you'd be wrong. You might think that Alchemised took some inspiration from Wuthering Heights, and apparently it did. But Sen Lin Yu is certainly someone who completely misunderstands what makes Wuthering Heights great, and for that reason, you should read Wuthering Heights yourself and find out what a doomed gothic pseudo-romance actually looks like. Wuthering Heights is a masterpiece. It is one of the great works of gothic fiction, and a lot of people don't like it because they expect some sad, doomed, tragic, Romeo and Juliet-esque romance, and that's not what they get. Instead, Wuthering Heights is two terrible people being awful to each other and only growing more gnarled and twisted with time until one of them dies, the other just falls apart in spite of the success and money that he has accrued. He has nothing if he doesn't have her, the woman who treated him terribly right from childhood. A toxic, spoiled brat who treated him awfully and then died, and he himself was twisted into a monster through bullying, through being pushed aside, and through lashing out in kind like some sort of pathetic incel monster. Heathcliff is one of the great gothic monsters. People don't talk about that enough. We think Frankenstein's monster, we think Dracula, we think Dorian Gray, we think Mr. Hyde. We don't talk about Heathcliff as a gothic monster. But he is. And yet, this is all framed as a tortured romance. Two characters who are spellbound by one another, who cannot help but be drawn to each other in spite of all this toxicity. They make each other's lives miserable. They make everyone around them miserable. This is a legacy of cycles of abuse, torture, torment. And yet, we continue to have all of this framed as some tragic romance. The entire book is misleading the audience, and you have to really think carefully about it. Takes a few reads to really appreciate it, I think, but Wuthering Heights is an absolute gothic masterpiece. If you want to understand what a tortured, tragic romance in a gothic setting, in a gothic story with gothic themes actually looks like, it certainly isn't Alchemised. It's Wuthering Heights. If you think that Alchemised is some exploration of destruction, self-destruction, cycles of destruction, it's not. And maybe instead you should read this. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Boy Parts is very much a novel about cycles of destruction, about self-destruction. It is a novel about a young woman who does nothing but sabotage herself, sabotage her own happiness, and reveal herself to be someone dangerously toxic along the way. This is a gritty, grimy, working-class novel set in the author's hometown of Newcastle, England. Our protagonist, Irina, takes explicit photos of ordinary young men, and she is finding success as an artist. An art gallery in London wants to exhibit her photography. She's finding success, and that only frightens her and sends her down a very self-destructive path when it comes to the men that she meets, how she allows the men to treat her, and how she treats the men. There are men who have less power than her, whom she treats terribly by taking explicit photos of them. And on the flip side, there are men at parties who do terrible, awful things to her when she's had too much to drink or taken too many drugs. This is about power dynamics. It's about being destructive to one another and to ourselves. It's about a woman with very questionable morals, doing horrible things to herself and dragging her friends down with her, sacrificing her art, sacrificing her success. And she's also someone with skeletons in her closet, skeletons that don't come out until the final pages of the novel. Eliza Clark is a female author who explores the dark side of working class femininity, of youth culture, of binge drinking and partying, of walking into the arms of dangerous men and taking advantage of those who love you, who do come towards you with good intentions. It's all about self-destruction and the kind of nuclear fallout that happens because of those acts. This is a very daring novel. Alchemised is not. Now, if by this point in the video you have conceded that Alchemised is not a clever Gothic novel, but you don't want to read a classic, maybe you think Wuthering Heights is going to be too slow, too boring, too old, too dated, whatever, well, lucky for you, I have this. This is My Darling Dreadful Thing by Dutch author Johanna van Veen, and it is one of the great modern works of Gothic fiction. Dutch authors are very good at writing dark things. And Johanna van Veen is not only one of the great Dutch authors writing today, but also one of the great Gothic authors writing today. And My Darling Dreadful Thing is a twisted, sapphic, Gothic tragedy. It tells the story of a young woman called Rose Beckman, barely into adulthood, who has been used by her mother for years now, because Rose can genuinely, actually see the dead. And her mother has used that, whether she believes it or not, she doesn't care. She's convinced enough by it to know that other people will be too. And so she's used it to conduct seances and get money out of vulnerable people. But soon enough, one of those vulnerable people who comes along for a seance is a wealthy widow, also a young woman who recently lost her husband and takes a liking to Rose, and so invites her to be her live-in companion at her crumbling country estate, somewhere in the Dutch countryside. Rose has a ghost companion who kind of piggybacks onto her, if you like, and so does this enigmatic young woman. This woman is named Agnes, and she lost her husband fairly recently, but her husband's sister, who is sick, still lives on the estate, and she's a strange thing. As the novel goes on, Rose becomes infatuated by Agnes. She'll do anything to make her happy, and at the midpoint in the novel, things go completely off the rails. The kind of insanity that you don't often see, because it's so daringly strange, grotesque, boundary-pushing in its imagery, in its grotesquerie. It feels very Frankenstein, very Dracula. This is shocking, dark, twisted, horror-fueled Gothic monstrousness. And it's all done in the name of love. Real love. Genuine romance between these characters. But we also know it's all going to end in tragedy, because between the chapters we get these transcripts of a police interview with Rose after something tragic happened at the house. All of those are being told in retrospect, and so we know things are not going to end pleasantly for Rose, for anyone. But you're going to have to read on and see how and why that is the case. This is a true Gothic romance. Speaking of romance, if for some deluded reason you actually think that Alchemised is a good romance, you should probably read this instead. This is also sapphic, by the way. This is the brand new romantic fantasy novel by Tasha Suri, one of the great fantasy authors of our time. The Isle in the Silver Sea takes place in an alternate history of Britain, specifically around the early industrial period. And in this story, we have characters who are fated to be reincarnations of doomed folk tale protagonists. There are stories, tales that exist all around Britain, and these tales are actually connected to the land itself. If a tale fails, if somebody dies as they are reincarnated or whatever, a part of the country dies with them. So a lot is riding on the success of this continued cycle of tragic tales, and our protagonists are two women who are reincarnations of one of those tales. The knight and the witch. One of them's a witch, the other's a knight. And up until now, this story has always been about a man and a woman. This time, not only are they two women, but they're also two foreign women. Two women of Indian descent. That's not the way it's supposed to be. This is a British tale for white British people. Heterosexual white British people, but that story is being disrupted now by their mere existence. This is a very smartly political novel. Not only just by the virtue of who and what these characters are, but also in the fact that it is a story about narratives, a story about traditions, a story about imperialism, about the British Empire, about colonialist string pulling and who gets to write the stories and keep the stories. Stories are thrown out if they don't match the narrative of white Britishness, of heterosexual white Britishness. Between the chapters, you get little segments of speeches, essays, pamphlets, short stories, all sorts of things, any form of writing. These things are all written down and checked by a government agency, and if they don't match the traditions of white Christian British power, they are thrown out, they are banned, their authors are tracked down and interrogated. This is very much a beautiful, beautiful romantic fantasy story between two amazing women, but it's also a brilliantly subversive and antagonistic tale about the toxicity of traditions and the legacy of white British colonialism. This is an actually smart romantic fantasy tale. If you think Alchemised is clever in any sense, you're wrong, and you'll know that when you read this and realize what a good, actually clever piece of political romantic fantasy looks like. And it is a beautiful fairy tale romance to boot. Now, I've been talking for a long time and I really want to stop. I'm done talking about Alchemised, but I just want to throw in Poor Things here at the end. If you've ever wondered if a man can write a truly brilliant gothic novel that is also an astute work of feminism, yeah, he can. Alistair Gray did. Alistair Gray, a great Glaswegian author, wrote one of the great modern Gothic novels and one of the great modern feminist novels in Poor Things. A novel that also upsets a lot of so-called feminist women. Read Poor Things. This is a subversive, Gothic, pseudo-romantic, Wuthering Heights-esque, Frankenstein-esque Gothic masterpiece. Read Poor Things. There you go. Alchemised is crap. Read these instead. Throw out your copy of Alchemised. Read some actually good, clever, subversive, romantic, gothic, whatever. Everything I've talked about here, these books. Read these as a jumping off point to free yourself from the cult of toxic romantasy. Throw out Alchemised, read some good fiction, and subscribe for books.